They promised they'd be back in an hour. I believed them. So I waited outside the bakery with a paper sack of muffins and a plastic cup of coffee cooling in my hand. Cars rolled past one after another, none of them slowing. No text, no call, no sound of familiar footsteps. It was on that wooden bench, beside a quiet street in a small town, that the truth landed heavier than I expected. I was alone, not just for that hour, maybe for good. We'd been planning that road trip for weeks. Joel said it would be simple, just a long weekend, one last look at the coast before the rains came. He offered to drive. Marissa volunteered to handle the rentals. All I had to do was pack the food and bring along my old maps. Joel thought it would feel like the old days, back when he was a kid. I'd ride shotgun, point out diners with my pen, hum along to whatever played on the radio. So I baked banana bread, wrapped sandwiches, even tucked silverware in napkins. I folded Joel's sweatshirt the way he liked it. I brewed the tea Marissa swore helped her sleep on long rides. I wasn't just along for the ride, I was part of it. We pulled into a town I used to love, tucked between hills, the kind of place with one main street and a bakery I hadn't seen in years. Joel parked and said he and Marissa wanted to stretch their legs, get gas, and then swing back to pick me up. They told me to grab something sweet. Said it wouldn't take more than an hour. I remember the time exactly 10:47 a.m. because the bakery clock was shaped like a cinnamon roll and always 5 minutes fast. So I sat on the bench with 2 bags of muffins, one for each of them. I watched people come and go, and I waited. By noon, the muffin bag had gone limp. My phone, the one Joel insisted I upgrade to, showed no signal. I didn't have my wallet, no keys, no car, just half a cup of lukewarm coffee and a swelling ache in my chest I couldn't name. By 2, the bakery owner stepped outside and asked if I was all right. I nodded, told him they'd be back any minute, but they didn't come back. Tell me, have you ever sat somewhere so long that the place itself starts to feel like it's watching you? That's what the bench became for me. Not just a seat, but a witness. A marker that split my life into before and after, and I can still recall the sound of every single car that wasn't theirs. I stayed there until dusk. The bakery closed early. The streets emptied quick once the sun sank behind the hills. I sat as shadows stretched long and cold across the sidewalk. When I finally stood, my knees carried the weight of too much waiting. The kind of weight that only comes when you've been left by someone who isn't coming back. I walked toward the edge of town, to the gas station Joel had mentioned. No car, no note, nothing. The attendant let me use the payphone out back. I dialed a number I still remembered by heart. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. Eventually, a man filling up his truck pointed me toward the nearest bus stop. Said the night bus could at least get me part of the way. I thanked him and walked slowly, the straps of my bag cutting into my shoulder. The bus was old, the seats stiff. I paid in crumpled bills I had tucked inside my jacket's side pocket. The driver said nothing. The woman behind me didn't speak either. Neither did the teenager with headphones up front. It was the kind of silence that doesn't calm you. It just sits heavy. We made 3 stops that night. At each one, I peered out the window, half hoping I'd see someone familiar. At the second stop, I tried to rest. I curled against the window, my jacket balled behind my head. That's when a memory came rushing back. Joel had been 5 years old when he came down with a fever that wouldn't break. We stayed awake all night together. I remember the way his tiny hand clung to my wrist as I pressed a cool cloth against his forehead. I sang to him, softly, over and over, even when my throat went raw. That night, I never closed my eyes. I just watched him breathe. Each slow rise of his chest felt like proof I was doing something right. Sitting on that bus years later, I remembered that version of him. The little boy who once whispered that he didn't want anyone but me. By the time the bus rolled into the next town, it was past midnight. I stepped off and found a metal bench outside a closed hardware store. The air was colder now. I pulled my hood tight and wrapped my arms around myself. The street was deserted. It's strange how the memory of holding someone small and warm in your arms can exist beside the reality of sitting alone on a freezing street. And somehow, they still feel connected. I didn't cry. I just sat still, waiting for the next bus, wondering when exactly he stopped needing me and how I missed the moment it happened. By the time I reached my own street, the sky had softened to gray. My feet throbbed. My back ached from the long ride. But more than that, the tiredness lived deeper in my bones. I stepped up to the porch and tried the front door. Locked. I reached into my coat pocket out of habit, even though I knew the keys weren't there. I hadn't carried them in months. Joel had said he'd take care of all the household things. Said I didn't need to worry about keys or codes. At the time, it felt like kindness. I knocked once, then again, nothing. I sent a message, then another. The screen stayed blank, no typing bubbles, no reply. The porch light clicked off automatically. That was new. Another setting Joel must have changed. I sat down on the bench by the window, the same spot where I used to rest while waiting for grocery deliveries. It still had the cushion I had sewn to winters ago. The one Marissa said clashed with the siding. I waited there, listening for the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. The sound of an engine that once meant someone was home. The hours dragged on. I checked my phone again. No reply. It was getting colder. I pulled my coat tighter, drew the hood over my head, and leaned against the wooden frame. My stomach was empty, but I didn't feel hunger, just a hollow quiet. By nightfall, I gave up knocking. At some point, I must have drifted off, because the creak of the porch woke me. It was Leah, my neighbor from next door. She'd lived alone since her husband passed. We weren't the kind of friends who told each other everything, but we'd shared cups of tea and stories at the mailbox often enough for her to notice when something was wrong. She stood there in her robe and slippers, holding a flashlight and a frown. She didn't ask what had happened. She just said I looked cold. I followed her inside. Her place smelled of lemon balm and furniture polish. She handed me a blanket and poured me tea without a word. I sat at her kitchen table, fingers curled tight around the warm mug. Later that night, I tried Joel again. Still nothing. I stared at the screen, rereading my own words. They looked strange now, like a voice echoing into a place that no longer existed. That night, I slept on Leah's couch, not because I wanted to, but because I had nowhere else to go. And for the first time, I understood what it meant to be on the outside of your own life. Not visiting, not passing through, just locked out completely, silently. Lily's FaceTime call came late one evening, out of nowhere. Her little face filled the screen, eyes bright but trembling with something she couldn't quite hold back. She gripped the phone with both hands as if it might slip away. Her voice was soft, breaking through the silence between us. She told me things no child should ever have to say. That they didn't want anyone to see me anymore. That her mother said I wasn't capable. That I couldn't be trusted with money. Her words landed gently, but they cut deeper than any shouted insult. The truth was no longer whispered behind closed doors. It was spoken through a child's tears. I held the phone tight, unable to offer more than a nod, though she couldn't see it. Lily's tears mirrored the ones I had swallowed for years, the ones that never found a voice. Her innocence had been taken, shaped by the sharp edges of her parents' words. That night, after the call, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The dark wrapped around me like a heavy cloak. The shadows reminded me of countless nights I had spent nursing Joel when he was sick as a boy. His small body fighting pneumonia back then. I was his protector. His anchor in a world that often felt too big and too cold. Now the world had shifted, and the roles had reversed. I was the one left vulnerable, pushed aside by those I had trusted most. The next morning, I found an envelope on my doorstep. It was thick, official-looking, stamped with the county seal. Inside were legal papers declaring me mentally unfit. The words stole my breath. Joel's name was listed as the petitioner. Marissa's signature sat right beside his. They were moving to take control of everything, starting with my assets. I sat on the worn wooden floor, tracing the edges of those pages. The handwriting in the margins was neat, practiced, cold. Every line spoke of assessments and declarations meant to strip me of my independence. I felt the ground shift under me, like standing in a house of cards built on betrayal. Leah noticed the change in me that day. She came over with a plate of fresh bread. No questions asked, just company. Her quiet presence eased the raw ache inside me. She didn't pretend to have answers. She simply sat nearby, reminding me I wasn't entirely alone. That day marked a turning point. I realized the fight wasn't just about money or a house. It was about reclaiming my voice, my dignity, the right to be seen as more than an obstacle, to be pushed aside. The battle ahead looked daunting, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark I hadn't allowed myself in years. Determination. The next morning, I stood in front of the old filing cabinet in the garage. It hadn't been opened in over a decade. Dust clung to its dents, the drawers stiff with age. That's where Bill had kept everything: our mortgage papers, insurance forms, and somewhere inside, the last copy of his will. I pulled each drawer slowly, flipping through yellowed pages and brittle folders with labels I'd written long before Joel ever met Marissa. At the very back of the bottom drawer, I found it, a manila envelope with Bill's handwriting scrawled across the front. My name, the date he signed it, 13 years ago. Inside were the original documents. The will was crystal clear. If he passed, I would retain full control of the house and our savings. Only after my death would Joel inherit anything. There was a clause protecting me from any transfer or override without my written consent. I ran my fingers over Bill's signature. His pen always leaned slightly to the right, even when he was nervous. I remembered the day we signed those papers. We had just come back from the hospital after his second heart scare. He wanted to be sure everything was in order. Back then, I didn't want to talk about it. But now, that piece of paper was the only shield I had left between me and the people trying to erase me. Later that afternoon, I carried the envelope to Leonard Hill's office. He was the same attorney who had helped Bill draft the will all those years ago. The sign out front was faded, and the waiting room looked almost exactly as it had the last time I was there. Leonard was older now, but his mind was still sharp. He studied the pages carefully, then leaned back in his chair. What he told me caught me off guard. A few months earlier, Joel had contacted his office asking for a copy of the original will. He claimed he was just helping me get organized, said I had misplaced the originals. Leonard had refused to release them without my consent, but Joel had managed to pull a scanned draft from an old shared folder Bill once created for emergencies. Joel had taken that version and tried to file a request to revise it. According to Leonard, nothing had been finalized. No approval, no certified changes. The courts were still waiting on a competency hearing. That explained the paperwork I had found on my doorstep. Joel hadn't come at me directly. He was building his case quietly, one step at a time. Behind the scenes, I sat with Leonard for another hour. We discussed my options. He recommended setting up a stronger legal safeguard, one that even a blood relative couldn't break. I nodded. I was ready. That night, I placed the original will in a fireproof box beside my bed. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't send a message or hint at what I had found. I let the silence settle, because now I knew something Joel and Marissa didn't. I wasn't broken. I was preparing. The next day, I took a cab across town to see Carol Simmons. We hadn't spoken in years. She had once been our neighbor, then our accountant, and later the woman who brought me peach cobbler after Bill passed. When she retired, she moved to a quieter neighborhood. I knew she would understand. She welcomed me without hesitation. Her home smelled faintly of lavender soap, the rooms filled with boxes of paper files. We sat at her dining table with 2 mugs of tea between us, and I told her everything. Joel, the forged documents, the petition to declare me mentally unfit, the subtle ways he and Marissa had been shifting my life around without asking. Carol didn't flinch. She just nodded slowly, then went to a cabinet and came back with a slim binder. Inside was a plan for a personal protection trust, not one of those flashy estate tools for millionaires. This was different, private, legal, fully within my rights. With her help, we started the paperwork. We listed the house first, then the savings, then the modest pension I still received from my years teaching at the community college. Every line I signed steadied my hands a little more. This trust wouldn't belong to Joel, wouldn't belong to any family member. It would be held under a new name, the Pierce Living Foundation. A name Carol came up with, half joking, half in honor of what I had endured. She said it sounded official enough that no one would question it. I agreed. Carol became the trustee. I remained the sole beneficiary. There would be no inheritance rights, no automatic succession. A clean, legal wall no one could break without my consent or my death. Even then, it would remain protected. We filed the paperwork the next morning. When I returned home, the house was quiet. Joel and Marissa weren't there. I made myself a sandwich, swept the kitchen floor, and moved my photo albums from the living room into my closet. No one noticed. I didn't announce what I had done. I didn't leave a folder out on the table as a warning. Silence had always been their weapon. I decided it could be mine too. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, left neatly on the hallway table. It was cream-colored, thick, with a gold border pressed around the edges. Inside was a printed card in cursive script. Joel and Marissa were hosting a private dinner at the house. A thank you gathering, it said, in honor of my grace and cooperation. It read more like a press release than a family note. They called it a celebration of a transition done with maturity and respect. At the bottom, in smaller print, it listed a dress code and asked for discretion. That line struck me most of all. This wasn't a celebration, it was a curtain call, one they believed I had no lines left in. I folded the card and placed it in the drawer beside my bed, right next to the trust documents and the handwritten notes Carol had helped me prepare, not out of spite, just insurance. I accepted the invitation, not because I wanted to be there, but because silence when used right can be louder than any speech. The days leading up to it, I stayed quiet. I swept the hallway. I watered the front planter. I greeted Marissa when she passed, though she hardly looked up from her phone. Joel came home late most evenings, whispering into calls from the garage. I didn't ask. I didn't interfere. On the morning of the dinner, I ironed a dark navy dress, simple but clean. I brushed my hair and wore the pearl earrings Bill had given me on our 25th anniversary. They weren't expensive, but they were mine. The dining room had been rearranged, new tablecloth, rented glassware, candles in the corners. Joel greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Marissa busied herself with the caterer and didn't bother saying hello. 7 guests arrived, old neighbors, family friends, a few of Joel's colleagues. People who likely had no idea what this night was meant to seal. Dinner passed quickly. Toasts were short. Joel stood at the head of the table, speaking of growth and family legacy. Marissa added her thanks for the smoothness of this past year. Their words polished the surface, but I caught the subtext. You stepped aside. You accepted your place. I raised my glass when expected. I smiled when someone looked my way. But I didn't speak. Not yet. Because I hadn't come to be polite. I had come to be remembered. And I had brought more than gratitude. In my purse, beneath a folded napkin, rested a copy of the amendment clause from Bill's original will. The one Joel never thought I had kept. The one that said any heir who tried to manipulate or isolate the grantor for personal gain would lose their inheritance. The dining room buzzed with low conversation and the clink of silverware. The chandelier flickered, casting warm light across the table. Joel lifted his glass, thanking everyone for coming, his words coated in charm. He nodded toward me, praising my grace and trust in handling the estate. Marissa chimed in, calling it a gift to the next generation. Her voice softened, calculated to sound thoughtful. I smiled, lifted my glass, and then set it down without drinking. The string quartet in the corner paused between songs. That was my moment. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded page. Heads turned. Joel's expression tightened. I cleared my throat. My voice was steady. I thanked them for the dinner, the effort, the gathering. Then I said I had brought something to read aloud, just one paragraph from a document they might have forgotten. Joel stiffened but didn't interrupt. I unfolded the paper slowly. It was the clause from Bill's original will. I read it word for word. Any beneficiary who used coercion, isolation, or undue influence against the grantor shall forfeit all rights to inheritance, effective immediately and without contest. The words hung in the air longer than the silence that followed. I folded the paper, slipped it back into my purse, and lowered my gaze to my plate. Joel said nothing. Marissa opened her mouth, then closed it again. The guests froze, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Even the servers hesitated. The music resumed faintly, almost apologetic. I excused myself quietly and walked out of the room. No scene, just a line drawn firm, legal, unshakable. The morning after the dinner, the house was unusually quiet. No footsteps in the hall, no music in the background. Even the refrigerator hummed more cautiously. I had expected confrontation, or at least a knock on my door, but nothing came. The silence was their answer, and that said more than words ever could. I opened the closet and pulled out the old storage bin where I kept family photographs. Most were neatly in albums. Some were still stuffed in envelopes I had meant to sort for years but never did. The smell of old paper filled the air as I lifted the lid. There were pictures of Joel as a child, his first school play, his graduation, the family vacation, where we all wore matching sweatshirts he hated. There were photos of Bill, always in the background, always with a hand resting on someone's shoulder. But past a certain point, Joel's photos stopped. No birthdays after his 30th. No wedding pictures. Nothing from Lily's birth. All those events had been captured on their terms, on their cameras, never shared back with me. The absence wasn't loud. It was gradual, quiet, like being cropped out of a life you once carried. That afternoon, Lily slipped into my room without knocking. She clutched a crumpled piece of notebook paper in one hand and wore her favorite green hoodie. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes wide, the same look she'd had the night she called me in tears. She didn't say much. She just wrapped her arms around my waist and held on. I sat down on the edge of the bed, and she climbed up beside me, knees pulled tight to her chest. After a while, she whispered, "You're my real family." I didn't correct her. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. I reached under the bed and pulled out one of the old albums, the heavy brown one with gold stitching. I opened it to a page with pictures of my garden Bill in his flannel jacket, and a younger me holding a basket of pears. I handed the album to Lily and told her she could keep it. She flipped through slowly, running her fingers across each image. She stopped at one of Joel, about 8 years old, grinning at a picnic table with chocolate smeared on his chin. She smiled, but turned the page. She lingered longer on a photo of Bill and me dancing at a neighbor's wedding. She asked if I missed him. I said yes. She didn't ask if I missed Joel. She already knew the answer. That evening, I left a small box at Lily's door. Inside was another photo album, one that told the story of a life before everything was reduced to legal papers and invitations lined with manipulation. She would grow up with proof, not of the people who tried to erase me, but of the woman who chose not to disappear. Joel and Marissa returned 3 days later. They came in through the back door, keys jangling, their voices low. By then, I was already packed. The house was quieter than it had ever been, not because it was empty, but because it had finally stopped pretending to be a home. I stayed in my room as they moved through the kitchen and hallway, their footsteps quicker, sharper. I heard drawers opening and closing, then silence, the kind of silence that comes when something no longer adds up. They had waited too long. Everything of mine was already gone. The closet held nothing but a hanger and an empty shoebox. My journals, books, and photo albums had been boxed up and collected to mornings earlier by a second-hand shop. The piano I hadn't played in years had been sold to a small church. Each room that once carried a piece of me now held only space. At noon, Joel knocked on my door, not hard, just once. He asked if I was open to a conversation. I told him I was heading out. I didn't offer details. He didn't ask for any. He stood in the doorway searching for something, maybe an apology, maybe a way back. Instead, I handed him the envelope Carol had prepared. Inside was confirmation from the county and the trust office, a legal summary of the asset transfer. The house, the savings, the insurance, all of it secured under the Pierce Living Foundation. His name was nowhere. He read the first few lines, then stopped. The color drained from his face. He swallowed hard, but stayed quiet. Marissa appeared beside him, phone in hand. She skimmed a page over his shoulder, then turned her eyes to me. No one raised their voice. That would have required too much honesty. Instead, she said it was fine, said it was good, everything was in order, said they were glad it was all settled. I nodded. Then I picked up my suitcase. Leah was waiting outside with her small blue car running. We had agreed days before when the time came. There would be no speeches, no scenes. I stepped out, closed the door behind me, and walked to the car without turning back. Through the window, I saw Joel standing by the hallway mirror. Marissa's phone lit up in her hand. No one followed me. The ride to the coast was quiet. The sun was already sinking when we reached the little house I had rented. A single-story cottage with white siding, wine chimes on the porch, and no shared walls. The kind of quiet that didn't ache. That night, I unpacked the last box and boiled water in my mother's old kettle. The furniture didn't match. The floor creaked, but every inch belonged to me. And for the first time in years, the silence inside felt earned. It was my birthday. I woke to the sound of waves brushing against the shore and the faint creak of the wind chime above the porch. The calendar on the wall showed the date in steady ink. I had circled it weeks earlier, not in anticipation, but as a reminder that I could still claim something for myself. No calls came, no cards, not even one of those automated emails with discount coupons, and somehow that felt all right. I brewed coffee slowly, the smell drifting through the small kitchen and into the living room. Outside, gulls moved across a gray sky. The air was cool, steady. I opened the window a crack and let the salt air in. Around 10, Leah arrived carrying a brown paper bag tied with twine. Inside were sugar cookies and a paperback about a woman starting over at 70. No balloons, no candles, just gifts. We didn't talk much. She set the cookies on the counter, poured herself tea, and sat at the little table by the window. I joined her with a quiet smile. We listened to an old jazz cassette, the kind of music that doesn't announce itself, but fills the room gently. Later that afternoon, I pulled out a thin stack of papers from a drawer. It wasn't a memoir, not exactly, more like letters written in chapters, notes to the woman I had been before all of it. Before the silence, before being erased. On the first page, written in pencil, was the title. I Am Not Invisible. Leah read a few lines, then placed her hand gently over mine. We didn't need to say anything. The words had already spoken. That evening, we walked the bluff behind the cottages, the sea on our left, the sky soft with late light. I didn't feel older. I just felt more real. There was no cake, no photos taken, no candles blown out. Yet for the first time in years, I felt celebrated by myself. The following Monday, I tied the manuscript with a blue ribbon and slid it into a manila envelope addressed to the Regional Archives Center. I didn't ask for it to be published. I only asked that it be kept, filed, remembered. The story wasn't for recognition. It was for record, for the woman I once was, for the girl Lily would one day become. For the stranger who might someday need proof that a quiet life still mattered, that a voice no one asked for still carried weight. Weeks later, a soft-voiced woman named Clara left a message on my landline. She thanked me for the submission. She said they had reviewed it. She told me about a new program, a collection of overlooked voices titled Asterisk Stories that stayed quiet asterisk. She wanted to include mine. I called back and gave my consent. That was all. The day the news came, Leah brought wildflowers from the coastal path. We placed them in a chipped glass vase on the windowsill and watched the waves turn silver in the late light. We didn't toast. We didn't cheer. We just sat with it. A moment that asked for nothing but to be witnessed. In the evenings now, I write a little more, not always about the past. Sometimes just about the way the sea changes color at dusk, or the sound of gulls when the sky clears. Life has grown smaller, quieter, but no less meaningful. There is no grand ending, no dramatic closure. Only the truth. I was left behind, then I left quietly. And in that silence, I built something that could not be taken. If my story reaches a quiet place in your heart, I hope it reminds you that you are not alone, that your voice matters even when no one is listening. If you've ever felt forgotten, pushed aside, or silenced, this space is for you. You can leave a thought, a name, or nothing at all. Sometimes, simply knowing someone else understands is enough.